So just giving an introduction of myself right before we go in. Hi, I'm Om. So my background is I'm a metallurgical engineer, right, from IIT Roorkee. Uh, I was born and brought up in a village named Savantwadi, which is on the Maharashtra-Goa border, right? Uh, Went to IIT Roorkee, studied metallurgy, ended up in finance of all fields, right? Joined a US-based PVC fund named Zephyr Peacock. So Zephyr Peacock is the Indian investment arm of Zephyr Management. So Zephyr Management basically runs emerging market funds across emerging economies, right? For example, we historically have run funds in LATAM, including Mexico, South Korea, Africa, India, right? Currently, we have three active funds: India, Sri Lanka, and Eastern Africa, right? Eastern Africa, including Kenya, Kenya, Tanzania, and those geographical areas. Uh, India is our biggest strategy. I work for the India Fund, right? So it's a pretty early stage C2 Series A kind of a fund with a uh, ticket size of around 5 mil as a first check. Yeah. I look at infra services, which includes clean energy and climate within Zephyr.
So to start off, how did you get interested in this private equity and emerging markets, especially in infrastructure and climate tech? What was your
Right.
starting point? Yeah.
So, okay. So when I went to college, right, I did not know what I wanted to do. So what I basically thought of was that when I go into undergraduate, right, getting to a good undergraduate school was my first task. So once I did that, I wanted to always be in a place where I could have a lot of options because I had no idea what I wanted to follow in terms of career until let's say I started college, right? So I had preferred to be at a place where I had options where I could explore everything. So that is what I did in my college, right? So for the first couple of years, I actually explored different fields. I tried software, I tried product, right? Eventually got into finance. Uh, that is where I started a course by a man named Ashwath Damodaran. I don't know if you might have heard of him. He's a professor
No,
at
I'm not.
NYU. So he's a professor at NYU. He teaches corporate finance valuations, right, to his undergraduate and MBA classes. But what he does is he actually uploads his classes on YouTube, and those are like 1.5 hour classes. And the whole semester he keeps on uploading, and every year he basically refreshes his own coursework, right? So every year he takes those classes at NYU, and then he basically uploads it. Like you might have seen some Stanford courses do that,
Yeah.
right? So he's that kind of a guy. He also has a online repository, right, of multiple financial ratios and stuff like that. So you don't have to calculate them. Basically, you can just plug and play, right? So I got intrigued in that. So when I did his courses out of just, I was trying to explore the field, right? So I wanted to get a good taste of finance. So I did that and eventually uh, came to the conclusion that I wanted to be in finance, right? Uh, and as I was already studying metallurgy, I I was going through a phase that I also liked my core subject, but the thing is, in so my course was metallurgical and materials engineering, so not just metallurgy. It included a lot of material science as well, which is right now one of the emerging sectors, if you could say, right?
Yeah.
Material science and metallurgy have been key to the human race for the last 200, 300 years, ever since the Bronze Age, right? So uh, we always kept on studying about newer materials, newer properties, right? But we could also see that those weren't commercialized yet, right? From taking these materials from let's say a college or a educational institute to actually seeing them work, right, on ground are two very different things. Uh, I'll give you an example, right? 3M. Are you familiar with the company named 3M?
Yeah.
They make those sticky
Tapes.
notes. Yes,
Yeah.
right? So they are actually a mining company by
Oh.
origin. 3M is some Minnesota mining something, right? So they started with mining. Eventually, what they did was they turned into a research house. So they started basically hunting for patents, right? So they have a lot of researchers who keep on doing research and eventually commercialize them to create products like let's say sticky notes, which is one of their biggest products. I think 70-60% of their revenues come from that sticky notes, right? Which revenue runs into billions of dollars, right? So there's an interesting story about that. So I think the time from where the patent there was for the sticky part, right? The glue.
Yeah.
So the innovation was that you could basically put it and just take it off without any damage to the surface, right? Earlier, if you wanted to stick something, there was some damage when you pull it off, right? To both your paper and let's say the wall or the surface that you're sticking it to as well. Uh, right? So they were trying to create an adhesive for some industrial applications, but that turned out to be too weak. So they just scrapped it. So one of the researchers who was working there, right? He was a part of a choir, a church choir at that point, and he saw that when they were practicing, right, they had to put always pins at that time to keep
Yeah,
the sheet music up, and that was causing harm to his wall at the time. And that is when he realized, okay, this can be commercialized. Now, taking that patent to commercialization stage is not a very simple task. You have to figure out what is the optimal operating model. Does the unit economics make sense? Can you actually make money doing that? Right? There are better solutions out there, but they come at a price, right?
yeah.
And to really create a sustainable model, you have to make sure you get the right products at the right place at the right price. And I mean, that is what I realized when I was doing my undergraduate, that there were a lot of innovative materials out there, but actually taking them to the ground onto the market, right? That requires that is a different kind of challenge, and that is what intrigued me to learn more about operating models, business models, and uh, at that time I was also interested in finance, so a field which kind of blended a lot of these, right, was PVC, and that is why I was attracted towards that.
So that's really interesting. So would you say that your undergraduate background shaped your interest lens in these areas for finance, I mean environmental technology?
In a sense, yes, right? Because I had some background on a lot of climate technologies that were happening, right? A lot of climate work that is being done in the last 20, 30 years mostly has been about solar, wind, electric vehicles, right? And all these segments, material science is pretty critical. Let's say photovoltaic cells, the reason why you're seeing an abundance in solar energy is because you can make those PV cells at a cheaper price. If you, let's say, went to the market 20 years ago, that was just not possible. It wasn't a sustainable way of doing it. PV cells have been discovered for a long time now. It's been like a
Yeah,
lot of time since they've been there, but the manufacturing scale hadn't been set up yet. And that is when China stepped in and made it pretty cheap to manufacture those. And that is what led to us adopting these technologies, right?
yeah.
In terms of EVs as well. My BTech project was actually in solid state batteries. So I had a pretty good background of how that sector evolved over time. Uh, and I mean, that is how I got interested into these different segments.
That's nice. Now on to going on to another side. So I feel that India's EV and battery ecosystem is still evolving. So
Mhm.
what would you say excites you the most about this space right now as of today?
Right. Uh, So when we look at the EV angle, right, or any climate angle for that matter, what is actually driving sustainable energy is not the climate angle, is the commercial angle. Nothing in
Yeah,
India will work unless there is a commercial angle to it. No one will pay for environmental gains, right? They'll pay for commercial gains. So the biggest challenge that EV faced over the last 10 years, even globally, not just India, right, is that your cost of manufacturing for these EV vehicles, by the way, 40 to 60% of a value of a vehicle is in the batteries itself, right? The other part is just metal and other parts, right? It's not a lot of value. In terms of value, the cost of the battery is a very major part of it. And within the last 20 years, right, your supply chain for these lithium ion batteries has has done pretty well. You have found new mining reserves, right? A lot of countries have started mining lithium, right? So your supply chain got a little bit relaxed. That is how you get your cost of manufacturing down because you increase your capacities, right? Basically, it's economies of scale. You start producing more of it, cost per unit goes down, and that is when you hit the sweet spot of your costs. So when we talk about electric vehicles, right, a running cost of electric vehicle is much lower than running a petrol or a diesel or a ICE, what we call it, right, internal combustion engine
yeah,
vehicle, right? So when you actually see that IRR coming in, when you see that on a 2 year, 3 year, 4 year running span, you can actually save a lot of money by using an EV. That is when your EV sales actually started to pick up. That is why you'll see that uh, in terms of electric vehicles, first, you'll see a lot of commercial two wheelers. That what I mean by commercial two wheelers is Swiggy drivers or Zomato drivers, right? Or Blinkit, quick commerce, right? These guys are one of the major drivers of electric vehicles because their income, their major cost is fuel, right?
yeah.
So that directly drives their unit economics. As a business, if I'm a driver, right, that is one of the major factors that I have to choose. So I would choose that. Second, the other sector which sees a very high adoption in EVs is commercial vehicles,
Yeah,
three-wheelers, auto rickshaws, right? Again, for them, it's pretty common sense that one of the major costs is actually uh, fuel, right? If you look at the day-to-day life. Uh, so that is another reason, right? So this is how I see EVs evolving. In terms of supply chain, it's a very complex scenario involving geographies which are which are pretty consolidated in terms of power. If you see, we are dependent on China for a lot of things, including rare earth metals, right? Including lithium, including heavy magnets, which are required for your motors, right? So I see these that India is trying to set up some domestic manufacturing as of such. So even when I started working at Zephyr, right, I had this uh, sense that okay, so at some point India will have to have some domestic source of these critical metals, uh, right, to be sustainable. And the only way that we can have that is either by, let's say, mining operations, or we can recycle, right?
yeah,
Uh, if you look at other kind of batteries, lead acid batteries, right? I think over 70-80% of lead batteries are actually recycled. Uh, right? So I see the similar trend happening. That is why one of my first investments was actually a battery recycling company based out of Gurgaon. Right. So when I started looking at this segment, I figured out that there were two major pain points in this sector. One, the segment that made the most sense in, let's say, buying EVs is the three-wheeler commercial one, like I mentioned. And the biggest challenge is 90% of commercial vehicles in India are financed. You get loans for them,
yeah,
right? But in electric vehicles, it's a totally different ball game because a majority of your value of a of a vehicle is in the battery, right? These lenders don't have ways to underwrite those assets. You won't know when a battery will break down, right? And it's a major cost. If, let's say, I give you a loan to run a three-wheeler, and let's say your vehicle breaks down tomorrow, you won't earn that money. If your earning stops, you won't start paying back the loan. That is how debt is underwritten, right,
yeah,
on an asset model. So that is when we realized, okay, we need companies who can provide data to underwrite. You always need data to underwrite any asset, and that is when we identified and invested in a battery financing company as well. So these are two trends that I basically identified, and we did make investments on those two trends as well. And I see India as a very good growth story for electric vehicles.
that's nice. So would you say that India's two commercial vehicles, electric commercial vehicles for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, is considerably the biggest in the world right now and most
Uh,
reliable also compared to vehicles for personal usage,
mhm.
comparatively it's larger than that, would you say?
So when you consider buying a vehicle for non-commercial purposes, right? There are a lot of different factors that go into play, right? It's more about consumer behavior, and obviously cost is a part of it, right? So in the non-commercial segment or the personal vehicle segment, we'll still be reliant a little bit on subsidies. We'll need subsidies to help it pick up, right? Because it's a personal decision at that point. If, let's say, you have decent amount of money, let's say you have a budget of, let's say, 60-70 lakhs in terms of buying a vehicle, you would always prefer an IC vehicle because you enjoy the feel of a vehicle at some
Yeah,
point, right? You want to at that point, the vehicle is not about running cost, is about if you like the vehicle or not, right? Or if does it fit your use cases. There are still challenges, let's say, in terms of long drives. What is the range of the vehicle? Are there charging spots in between? Right? For small logistical commercial purposes, in a city you'll always find charging ports. But when you're, let's say, going for a long drive, right, you're not really sure uh, if you can reach your destination, right? So there's some amount of anxiety in terms of your charging point. The range, that is what we call range anxiety, right? So there are a lot of infra problems that need to be solved, and basically also there's a factor of consumer mentality that goes into these. So the obvious ones are commercial vehicles, either two-wheelers or three-wheeler commercial vehicles. But yeah, uh, I do see personal vehicles also turning towards the electrical part in a few years, right? Just because the newer ones, the newer products that are coming in, right? Those are just, I mean, those are it's a real pleasure to drive those. right? But in terms of technology, we still need to up our game. Let's say there's a lot of software element to electric vehicles as compared to internal combustion engines, right? In ICE vehicles, only electrical part or the only software part goes into the EMS unit, or let's say the infotainment unit. But in terms of electric vehicles, you have your controllers, you have your motors, you have your batteries. So it requires a lot of software work that still needs to be done.
Yeah. So, how do you evaluate whether a company is commercially viable or is just focusing more on the environmental aspect? How would you evaluate your return on investment that you would hope to get if you're investing in a particular company?
Right. So, see, we always price externalities into our base case, right? But the thing is, impact investing is not about impact. It's about who can create sustainable impact, right? You want to ideally invest in a company which makes money and meanwhile also solves for the carbon issue. The thing is, if you solve for carbon, right, carbon footprint, that in itself creates a lot of value in terms of costs.
Yeah,
Yeah, and you really want something that can help your, let's say, customers save on cost. That is the idea behind energy. That is the idea behind clean energy or climate investing, right? So it's a theme, but again, we are a fund, right? We want to make money in the end.
yeah,
It's not just about climate. It's about who can actually create a long-lasting impact on climate. And those who actually create impact on climate, right? You can't keep on funding a company to just clean up carbon footprint. You want
yeah.
a self-sustainable engine that runs, right? And you want to find those kind of businesses. So that is what we focus on.
So, as an investor, how do you balance financial returns with environmental or the social impact in your decisions? So, do you focus on the environmental outcome of your investment, or is it mainly financial?
Okay. So the thing is, we have base cases in terms of what we want in terms of environmental and social impact, right? But what we want to do is we also want to maximize financial returns on top of it. If it hits our base case and then also gives a certain amount of, let's say, financial return, that we would go for that company rather than someone who hits our base case but does not provide that kind of uh, that kind of financial return. So the main metric is still financial return, but you have to at least hit a base case of social and environmental impact.
And what are the common mistakes you saw in the first time founders in the climate slash EV space making?
Right. Uh, so this is a pretty prevalent mistake that a lot of founders do is they are over reliant on subsidies, right? Uh,
Yeah,
and policy. Uh, you ideally want to work in a business where you are not reliant on these kind of external factors. If a business is actually reliant on government support or subsidies, right, there's a very big macro risk at play there, right? Policies change, priorities change, right? But that could also be a very big risk. Second is not diversifying the supply chain enough. In a lot of cases, supply chain hits or supply chain when it deviates, right, it causes a very big impact on your business. So that is another one.
yeah. So suppose in a hypothetical scenario, the government reduced its subsidies or their policies for EVs and climate
Hmm.
tech. I don't think it's very likely right now in the near future, but suppose they did that, how would these
Hmm.
companies be impacted?
Yeah. So first of all, your sales numbers go down, right? Because
Yeah,
when subsidies go down, your clients are paying more. So you have to again balance your margins, right? So either what you'll do is you'll take some hit on yourself because customers are willing to pay more, right? On the customer side, uh, see, the reason that there are subsidies is that the once, let's say, your volumes are up to a certain extent, then your economies of scale starts playing in. So your margin thicken, right? Ideally, in that scenario, a government will start tapering down its impact subsidies because obviously your costs are better now. So it's back. Subsidies are there to help businesses get to that economies of scale. They are not supposed to be there for forever, right? Once you are up to a certain volume number, right? your costs are expected to go down. So you should be able to take that hit. But when you're starting such a business, if you're not reliant on these subsidies, right, either ways you'll have a capital efficient business. So your margins might take a hit, but you'll still do it. You'll still do well.
So can you share an example of a company where technology wasn't the differentiator, but execution was, and how they brought environmental tech out into the market?
Where operational, okay.
Yeah.
Uh, okay. So this is more on the social impact side rather than environmental impact. But one of the companies in our portfolio is named Rippler, right? Uh, so okay, one thing I'd like to let you know is technology is not a business. Technology is a tool which you use to create business, right? Uh, so how you use technology is pretty important. I mean, leveraging technology to improve your operations is something that you should aim on doing. For example, there is a company in our portfolio named Rippler, right? So what Rippler does is they are an FMCG distributor. So have you ever wondered how let's say, biscuit packet gets to a general store or a kirana store? Are they buying straight from the brands, or what? What do you think happens there?
There must be a really huge supply chain distribution setup.
Yes,
Yeah.
correct. So what happens is you have a brand like Nestle, right, who then has a super stockist. Let's say they have statewide super stockists, right? And these statewide super stockists then have distributors between them arranged according to pin codes, right? What a distributor basically does is they hold inventory, and whenever, let's say, a retailer is running out of goods, he just calls up the distributor and buys stuff from him, right? So a brand sells their goods to super stockists sells it to distributors, and distributors sell it to retailers, right? Now, traditionally, this model has been made over the last 100-120 years, because that is how long distribution has worked out, right? If you look at Unilever's history, it's a huge company, right? It's been there for the last uh, what is it, 80, 100 years, more than that, right? So it takes a lot of time to build this network as well. Now, how this is traditionally set up is there are businessmen like you and me who have warehousing space, who buy goods and then basically sell them, and you make a certain small amount of margin on that because it's a very large volume, right? But uh, these are individual distributors, mom and pop distributors, right? They don't have any technology on top of it. The problem is, because of your low margins, these guys have only 3 to 4% gross margins, right? That's a pretty low number. If you want to manage your costs between it, because you also have to distribute this, you have to use your own vehicles to take them. You have to rent a space, right? So there's a lot of costs related to it. Plus, if you, let's say, if there is some inventory wastage, let's say rats get into your warehouse, right? You're losing 97% of the value of goods, which directly cuts down your margins, right? Let's
Yeah.
say you sell 100 biscuit packets and three of them go to waste. You're still making a loss. You're not making a profit on that,
Yeah.
right? So that is why operational efficiency is very key in such businesses. Now, what Reply does is they've implemented their own software technologies, right, to create a replicable model for distribution. Now, what they do is they basically take over this business and say, okay, you know what, Unilever, uh, why don't you give me this pin code? I'll be your distributor, right? So what this does is, due to these software efficiencies, due to these operating models, right, they behave like professionals, and they behave like a publicly like a company, right, rather than individual distributors, and they create these SOPs to bring in operational efficiencies, which decreases your wastages, increases your warehousing efficiency, increases your logistics efficiencies, right? And then what they do is they replicate this over neighboring geographies. So they can basically centralize a model. Let's say I put one warehouse in Indranagar, part of Bangalore, and supply, let's say, four different pin codes from that. I don't have to distribute my warehousing. There's much more efficiencies in that, right? Now, the second part of it is when you're distributing to these retailers, right? You already have access to these retailers. Now, what you can do is you must have seen a lot of D2C brands out there right now, right? You can
Yeah.
buy stuff online, right? Most of these guys are reliant on ads, right, for revenue, because they're overly reliant on e-commerce, right? But one of the most sustainable ways of distribution is actually FMCG, GT, general trade, what we call it, right? Mom and pop stores distribution, because there's a very एक कहावत है हिंदी में, जो दिखता है वो बिकता है. The
Yeah.
way
Mm.
most of these goods are actually marketed is just by displaying them on the shelves, right? You won't see a lot of ads for Parle-G, but you still buy a
Yeah.
Parle-G when you go to the store because you see that, right? So a way to make these D2C brands sustainable is actually setting up these general trade distribution for them to getting them to these moments pop stores rather than being dependent on, let's say, someone like a Zepto or a Flipkart, right? What Rippler can do is when they try to sell it to, let's say, a retail store, they can have a catalog of goods, saying that okay, these are some new brands that we have that you can buy as well, and these guys can access their existing retailer base to serve D2C brands. And while Unilever is still paying you 4%, these big brands are willing to pay you 20% margin. So make a very decent amount of gross margin on that, those products.
Oh, I never knew companies were just handling supply chains existed. So, what would you say, based on your experience, how do you think the supply chain and logistics market would change, especially after COVID and in a more climate
Hmm.
conscious world, in terms of digitalization, resilience, and sustainability?
Right. So, okay, COVID was first a very big shock
Yeah,
on the ecosystem, right? Made us really realize how fragile supply chains are. Uh, right now, on that part, right, one of the reasons why is because traditional companies have their traditional operating models, they move slow, right? Because there are huge volumes at play. You generally don't want to disrupt your whole business model by trying something new. So there is some resistance to change. But let's say after a big shock like COVID, right? A lot of companies have started this trend of creating digital pipelines, if I may call so, digital supply chains with your physical supply chains. What that means is, let's say if I run a logistics company, right? Earlier, before COVID, I would generally not have a tracking or a monitoring software with my trucks. But right
yeah,
now, yeah, you want to be as efficient as possible. So what you do is, in this case, you try to optimize for cost. But when you try optimizing for cost, right, you always want to want your vehicles to run for a lower time, right, for a lower distance. That has an environmental impact. Over a longer term, I think these systems will get reliant, will get resilient, right? And the more people start using them, the more efficient ways people will figure out using this, because there is not a lot of history or not a lot of data to work on currently. As the adoption rate starts picking up, right, you'll find more and more efficiencies coming out there. So it's a very positive trend that we're seeing right now.
so that's very interesting, firstly. And do you see that in the future, do you see India playing a major role in the global supply chain as
Mhm,
companies and particularly many countries are diversifying away from China as the
mhm.
sole distributor?
Right. Okay. So historically, right, if you look at India, it's a service-based economy, right?
Yeah,
In India, just because your cost of operations, right, or your cost of labor is so low, there is one of the reasons why technology adoption in India is as well low as well, right? Because let's say if I want to add a robot to my factory, right, I'm not saving a lot of cost because my cost to, let's say, hire people was not as high anyways. But let's say if I want
yeah,
to run a warehouse in the US, right, cost of hiring people is much higher than what it is in India. So it makes more sense for me to opt in for a robotic system, let's say, right?
agreed.
So in India, you have to find out these clever jugadu operational ways uh, to to uh, to innovate, right? One of the prime examples is Zepto, quick commerce, right? Quick commerce is viable in India. Uber, Ola are more viable in India than other countries just because of the fact that people are willing to work at a certain price point where others aren't really working at, right? So these businesses are ultra competitive. So every operational inch matters. That is why uh, Indian companies have an operational edge over others. This is what I feel,
Yeah,
right? And to leverage these operational uh, edges, now they are developing technologies, right? Because they already have the thought process of how to optimize operations. Now, just using tech to optimize to take it further is another another innovation on top of that. right? So fields like quick commerce and e-commerce, I think India will do much better, right? You'll have a lot more operational technologies that are coming out of India.
So, and India's middle class population is growing. So, do you think
Hmm.
e-commerce would also increase now?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Consumer patterns of Indians have changed drastically over the last 5 to 10 years because of the penetration of e-commerce, right? You are seeing newer and newer models like Meesho, Shopsy, right, entering the market where you try to serve these middle class populations, right, and get things to people at a lowest cost, as low cost as possible, right? Because India is a very price sensitive economy. On top of that,
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, I see there is a huge market for e-commerce. People have accepted e-commerce as a part of their lives, right? And I see no reason why they should not grow from here.
And let's see, what do I ask next? Um, do you want to move on to the segment about, do you want to give advice for teenagers and aspiring investors? So, what advice would you give to teenagers who want to become investors or entrepreneurs in the environmental tech aspect field?
Right. Uh, Really interesting. I don't really have a very fixed structure on that, but what I think is you should be inquisitive, right? One of the reasons why I got interested in it is because uh, I was studying material science and I wanted to see how these materials get on ground at a certain price. Why are things which are better than what I'm using right now not being used, right? Those are the curiosities that got me interested in these fields. First is you need to generally have these kind of inquisitiveness. You need to open a battery pack on your own. You need to start building stuff, right? Just be curious for the first part. Second is uh, you have to also think in a structural way about how you need to be interested in learning about businesses and how they function. Right?
Yeah,
I think finance as a core field is something that even if you don't know a lot about finance, right, it's fine if you want to be an investor. You can always pick up those skills, but what you can't pick up is inquisitiveness and that knack for learning about how businesses work. Even myself in college, I haven't done any course for finance, right? As of such, I have no credits, no credited
yeah,
courses that I've taken for finance. But this is again like technology, knowledge of finance or FRA, what we call financial reporting accounting, is just a tool, right? So try learning more about businesses, see how things are working in your lives, and observe observe how businesses grow.
definitely. I agree with you. And suppose I wanted to start investing today, what
Mhm.
should I find in a company that can make me a profit as well as be beneficial for the environment as the company as a whole?
Right. Uh, on the environmental aspect, right, what I think you should do is first there are certain segments where it is pretty obvious that those are environmentally positive, right? For example, there's solar, right, or recycling companies, circular economy companies out there. Now, what you have to do is you have to see where actually uh, saving carbon footprint or being environmentally positive is actually creating monetary value for people. You ideally want to invest in a company where you're creating the most amount of commercial gain by offsetting carbon, right?
Yeah,
Uh, for example, now again, like I said, this is a little bit based on government policy, but there are a lot of businesses which are built on top of EPR credit, which is extended producer responsibility, right? So if I'm, let's say, Coca-Cola and I'm selling plastic bottles, I have to make sure that uh, equal number of plastic or equal amount of plastic that I sell gets recycled in a year. So I have
yeah,
to basically pay people to get it done. So there are businesses built on top of that, right, which is pretty profitable. Uh, like I said, battery recycling, right? India needs a domestic source of lithium. The chemical extraction process that is available in India is pretty profitable, right? So you have to basically judge on how can you commercially solve these climate issues and basically judge them on which of them is most efficient.
yeah.
Yeah.
So is EPR really being enforced in India or is it just like there? What would you say?
Um, for for very big brands, it is definitely a very big challenge, right? For let's say someone like Coca-Cola, Palmolive, Colgate, right? For these guys, definitely it's very strict. But for let's say smaller brands, 100, 200 CR, revenue branch, right? It's not very strictly applied because there's so much uh, so many companies out there, right? It's still a government entity. They don't have the manpower to actually enforce it over a longer part. So right now they're pretty much working on the top, let's say 500 600 companies out there. But I think technology will also play a role in this, right? The more traceability you add in your supply chain, the more easier it will be to track where your products are going. And once you get that in, right, you won't need a lot of people to keep monitoring you.
Yeah.
So that will change over time.
And thank you for this insight. And do you think, as of now, schools and universities are doing enough to prepare students for careers in climate innovation and venture capital?
Uh, so from my experience, right, I've been to an
Yeah,
engineering school, right? I have not yet been to a business school, but I have friends who have gone to B school. What I think is in India, right, there's a people don't really go to colleges to learn what
yeah.
they're studying there, right? People are looking for jobs rather than to learn. That is something which needs a little bit of changing, right? Uh, from my perspective, engineering schools are not really bothered about children as of such because they just want to get people in and placement cell is not dependent on any of the professors, right? You have students who run the placement cell and bring companies in. So uh, these colleges don't really take a lot of effort into teaching students as well of their core subjects because aren't really interested in studying metallurgy. Even in my class, right? Most of the people went into software. That they just wanted to study because of their CGPAs. Somewhere we need to make a bridge between what you teach in school versus what is commercially applicable, and you need to, let's say, bridge a gap between that. See,
Yeah.
uh, the educational institutes in India are pretty good. There is infrastructure, right, which has been built in the last 5 10 years, which was absent earlier to that, for that matter, but which is there right now, right? So you need to create access from these institutes to careers where actually you're using what you're learning. For example, in metallurgical engineering, right? If I went to the US, let's say, to study, I could have worked for Applied Materials, a company like Applied Materials, right, or other such companies which are decently paying ones. But there's not a pipeline for that yet. I think the more schools take it seriously, I think the more children will start taking it seriously. And once they start taking it seriously, you'll see these companies coming into the pipeline.
So apart from schooling, are there any book recommendations you have for teenagers interested in finance so they can start investing,
Right.
learn more?
There are actually a lot of them. Right. Personally,
Yeah,
there are, I mean, three books which I personally like. One of them is called The Halo Effect. So it's a book by Rosenzweig, right? But the reason why it's a very interesting book is uh, uh, the whole concept of the book is that if something sounds good, doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't mean it's good, right? What generally happens is when someone is very good at storytelling, right? While having some superficial trappings of science or some logic, some superficial logic plus a good story is most of the times enough for an investor, right? If you tell a very good story and some part of it makes sense, okay, right? People don't generally go deep into that. So in that book he goes into such examples, right? I mean, Richard Feynman had a word for this called cargo cult science. You should take a look at that if you're really interested. So he basically tells us how we should uh, break down storytelling and look for actual facts, right? When taking
yeah.
a decision, when taking a quantitative decision, and not just be reliant on storytelling, right? That is one of them. Second is what I personally loved was Secrets of Sandhill Road. So Sandhill Road uh, is basically in Palo Alto, and it has all of your old OG VCs on that road. That was the road where the first VC venture capitalists actually set up their shops. So, for example, if you look at the history of venture capital, right, one of the pioneers of venture capital was Mr. Don Valentine. He was the one who started Sequoia, right? So Sequoia, Khosla Ventures, A16Z, Lightspeed, all these are headquarters actually on Sandhill Road. and
Yeah.
this book contains a lot of conversations within those OG VCs out there, and how they talk about businesses, how they think about businesses, right? Some of If you actually read that book after reading the Halo Effect, right, you will understand where people go wrong and how much venture capital is actually based on storytelling rather than facts. So you'll get a lot of value out of that book if you read it in order. That's what I
So
personally
have
feel.
these books helped you with your personal investing? For
Oh
example, you
yeah,
said Richard Feynman's Cargo Cult Science.
yeah.
So when you listen to a company's pitch or something
Hmm.
like that while
Hmm.
investing, do
Yeah,
you also try breaking down the facts, seeing what
for sure.
action they offer?
For sure. So I'll give you an example, right? So when I take a look at a pitch, there are times when a founder tells you about metrics and then starts with the story, or will start telling you a story, then tell a metric. Okay, so we did this, this led to this, and further story, right? But there are questions that you need to ask in between, so that uh, let's say he gives you a reasoning and a output, right? There might be two, three things in between that he might not have told you, and you have to be the one to ask him about that. So that book has helped me basically to ask those questions to see if it totally makes sense. From the narrative uh, to the output that the guy told me, right? There's still a couple of steps in between that I need to verify, and it has given me insights on what those things might be, so that I don't miss a lot of things in those cases. For example, I'll give you something, right? Um, there are some business. Okay, so there are a lot of big family businesses, right, in India. A lot of family
Yeah,
businesses. Let's say your father runs a steel mill, right, or something like that, for which
you
has a
accurately predicted that somehow.
okay. I've not touched about it, right? But okay. So your father runs a steel business. He does, let's say, 500, 600 CR in terms of revenue. You start a scrap trading business, right? Start
Yeah,
scrap trading startup, let's say, right? And a lot of transactions for your businesses are actually your father purchasing your scrap, and you say,
yeah,
okay, my revenues have gone up by 500%, and give me a very good story, right? If I don't ask you how much are related party transactions, I might be inclined to say, okay, this is a very high growth startup, right? So I'll just give you an example on that. So this helps you uh, basically make sense of the story as a whole. Yeah, I think if let me know if it doesn't make any sense. I'll try to make better sense of that argument. But yeah.
yeah. So, and now to conclude, if there's, what do you, when you look back at your journey so far, what is one
Mm,
decision or turning point that shaped your outlook as an investor in climate and infrastructure? That one pinnacle, that one moment that formed.
mm. Uh, I think so. There's one company that I think we haven't discussed here right now, which is Agmet, right? I had this notion that very deep tech, right, or something like a semiconductor or something like that, is very hard to make in India. One of the reasons is that it requires a lot of early investment and a lot of patience, right, which Indian companies generally don't have. And I was also undersold on the research environment or the deep tech research environment based out of India. But when I saw what these guys are making, how the government is helping them, right? That really was a very big turning point on me in terms of climate tech. I'll give you the whole story, right, of how it happened. Uh, so this is a group of five professors. One of the professor was an ex-employee of IBM for 10 years. The other professor was the ex-head of DRDO. Right then he started working as a professor. The third one was the ex-head of NVIDIA India. Then he started working at AMD India. He set up the India division of AMD in India. Then he worked as a India head of applied materials, and then he started teaching an entrepreneurship course when he got retired. Right. So these five were the earlier pioneers of technology, gallium nitride technology, right, in India. And Niti Aayog in 2016, 2017, right, wanted to explore. Niti Aayog is a planning commission of India. Right, they wanted to explore if these semiconductors can be actually manufactured in India or not. And they basically went out to all these different research schools. So these guys were based out of IST Bangalore, right? These guys were not working together as of that time. And Niti Aayog basically went to them, asked them, okay, we want to explore setting up a fab in India, right? So can you help us create a report on that? So these five professors volunteered, and they came up with a report. What Niti Aayog did was very surprising, right? This is what told me that okay, there is actual government support, right, to this cause. Is that they asked the five of them to start a company to make gallium nitride semiconductors, and they gave, I think, $50 million to IST Bangalore to set up a fabrication unit just so that these guys could make the semiconductors in India,
Yeah.
right? So this was kind of a inflection point where I saw, okay, things are really happening in India, right? Uh, Before that, I had never heard of a semiconductor fab being made in India, right? Because this is the deepest of deep tech that you can make, right? And that was one of the points that changed my view on the technological prowess of Indian companies in the future. I think more and more technological innovation will happen in India.
Thank you. So, thank you so much for sharing your time, insights, and experiences. It was honestly very insightful on your journey and clarity on investing in climate tech, infrastructure, and innovation. Yeah, I'm overall really thankful. This was a really good podcast.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Ansh. I mean, it
thank
was a
you.
pleasure to interact with you. Right. Thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here. I wish you the best.
Thank you.